How far did we get? Anybody remember the presentation? And I'll say I got quite a bit of feedback about last week's presentation. I've heard and seen these numbers about Episcopal Church membership, the Diocese of Pittsburgh. I've observed it firsthand for the last 20 years, but have seen it do this. So national population is doing this over the last 40 years. Church attendance membership is doing this. It's scary. It can be depressing the first time you see it. Oh my gosh, when did this happen? It's not an overnight. It's been decreasing for a long time. I don't want you to be upset or nervous or afraid or anything like that. It's simply good to know the health and some of those facts and figures just to see where we are. Now, Calvary is the outlier in that system, that dynamic. There are about, ballpark figure, 200 congregations the size of Calvary, Episcopal congregations in the country. Some smaller, some, well, not many bigger, but in that range of us up. Some smaller that are very vibrant and vital. They happen to be in a smaller area. They're not going to get any bigger because they're in a small town, yet they have what they have. Size does not mean success. Size does not mean health, vitality. I'm not suggesting that. But seeing the decrease across the board, something's not quite right. What I think is happening at Calvary and to a lesser degree at the diocese is there are real signs we're headed in the right direction. How far? I don't have these overheads. Do you all have this page? There are a couple copies of last week's there. Did anything strike you before I start talking again about last week? I'm going to move quickly through some of this and get to the next foundational part of this lecture series. Anything else really strike you?
The great decrease in 1 year from the number of parishes.
In this diocese? I did check with the bishop. I ran by the numbers. The page that lists, it's a very boring table with facts and figures, but it lists the attendance, the year, the parishes, number of members, and average Sunday attendance in Pittsburgh. And let's just say 2002, all this is online right off the Episcopal Church's website. In 2002, we had 71 parishes, a little over 20,000 members, and 8,500 at church on Sunday in the Diocese of Pittsburgh. And let's pick a not random year, 2008, right before the split. We had 66 congregations, so we decreased by 5. 19,000 members, we decreased by 1,000. And 7,000 in attendance, we decreased by 1,500. That was before the split. And then after the split, we dropped to 28, this is 2009, dropped to 28 congregations, 8,500 members, and 2,500 at church on Sunday. So it was a huge, huge hit. Interestingly, we now list 37 congregations, and so I asked the bishop, do we really have 37 congregations? Anybody know the answer? Anybody in property type committee person would know?
Yeah, that's the answer, sort of. Some came back, some were reestablished.
Sort of, more or less. Probably less. There would be fewer than there were. There are probably 35. We closed one. Some of these are empty buildings. Some of these are vital. There's one truth about small congregations. You cannot kill them. You can't do it. Is that, in Methodist tradition, is that true? They endure regardless of clergy, catastrophe, schism, snow, doesn't matter because they're made up, we'll get to this a little bit later, small family units, usually a few families. They're related. They're not going anywhere until they all die off. They're going to be there. So we have about 35 congregations. There's Calvary with 1,600 members, and then St. Paul's Mount Lebanon, and then Christ Church North Hills are 250, 275, and then it starts dropping. Most of our diocese would be termed, and again, this is not a value statement of good, bad, they're smaller, fewer people. 12 to 25 on a Sunday is pretty normal. So this is weird. How many people are in here? I'm a priest, I can't count attendance. 30? So this would be a mid-sized congregation in the Diocese of Pittsburgh. This is the whole church over right at the midway point for all the congregations in Pittsburgh today, assuming there's no snow. And yes, oh Lord, how do I say this the right way? This would be bigger.
You have 35 people present, but you probably have a membership of maybe 80 or 90. Not everybody counts.
Correct. This is bigger. I was trying to say the demographic makeup of this group probably closely parallels the average congregation. Sarah. Yes, ma'am. Would you say that?
We have a lot more diversity at Calvary than a lot of the small congregations. Some of those are completely really white.
That is largely true. And if it is the case, and it is, and it's not just Pittsburgh, it's everywhere. As I said, most of the smaller congregations are a few families with, people come and go, but there's a core group of a few families. They're probably interrelated in some way if they've been in the same small town for a long time, and that's just the way it is. So they're going to be, if those families are black, the church is going to be black. If the families are white, if they're of all English stock or all whatever, that's largely going to be the case. John?
Jonathan, a lot of, not just churches, but other organizations work this way. For the smaller units, is there some kind of subsidy from the diocese to keep them going?
Oh, wonderful question.
Is it ultimately a bishop's call about whether you keep something open or not?
That's I heard at least 8 questions in there, but let's stick with 2. So ask me again the subsidy question. How is it the bishop's call whether a church endures, continues, or not? At this time in the life of the diocese, there is a group trying to discern by what criteria could the diocese, the bishop and staff, step in if there's an issue. What would that be? If the vestry or equivalent request it? If they keep spending up their endowment at a very high rate? If they don't pay their apportionment, the money to the diocese? It's really not clear. What does it gain a bishop? Let's just speak politically and not religiously for a moment. Well, St. Swithins, you've got 12 people, as you've had for the last 30 years. I don't see any industry coming in. You are wonderful people. I think I shall close you because you give $5,000 a year to the diocese, and we can't have any priest come here. To what end? Why would he do that? If there's no congregation there, that's a different story. But it is devastating to do that. And again, what do we as a diocese gain from that? I think probably the best knowledge of this, of the smaller places with the building, let them be. They're not hurting anybody, are they? In different traditions, Roman Catholic, bishop just comes in and you're done. We can't really do that. And how much energy would it take a bishop, and how much goodwill would it develop after we split because a bishop said leave? What would that do now after all those people stayed? So it's very unlikely to happen. The first question was, is there a type of subsidy? There used to be 2 categories of congregations in the Episcopal Church, and it's still this case in most places. It's not here anymore. It worked remarkably well, and I wish we had it back, but we don't. There were parishes and there were missions. Parishes were financially self-supporting, and they could afford a full-time priest, and whatever percentage the diocese asked for, you'd give as apportionment or assessment. You could pay that. And as long as you could pay all your bills and have a full-time priest, you were a parish that is financially self-sustaining. Everybody else was a mission. One is not better than the other, but one is not financially self-supporting. They need help. What we did here, I don't know when, was to dissolve that distinction. Everybody's a parish, which is a crazy idea, because what it did by saying everybody's a parish, before it was much easier for the bishop to help out, because technically who's the rector of Calvary Church? Me. Who would have been the rector of all these missions if without a full-time priest? Under the old system, it was the bishop. It was a lot easier to help do things, but we got rid of that. And so unless we reestablish that, ever to close a church is virtually impossible. But that's the place we are. How many congregations in Pittsburgh are getting financial assistance from the diocese directly? Any guess? Do you know, Russ?
Well, what's coming through my mind, and I've seen this from the perspective of a trustee for the last 6 years. Let me just say, in terms of the financial assets of the diocese, I believe they're in good hands, not just mine, but many others. We're being very conservative and prudent about what we draw, even for the operations of the diocese, which is why staff and programs are as small as they are. Parishes are not being subsidized relative to their usually one-to-one operations.
Out of the diocesan budget. What we give, it's not.
Many of the smaller parishes are getting by because we also have in this area a number of retired clergy who have pensions who can go in once or twice a week, conduct services. And that may be the entire future of those congregations until the last member dies. I don't know. Where the diocese is making a difference, and probably has to, is with necessary repairs and maintenance of the buildings that these congregations inhabit, and most of that money is put out in the form of loans. And I don't want to talk a lot about cases, but one of the congregations that's been most in need of that kind of support is our friends at the Holy Cross Homewood. Their building came close to collapsing 5 years ago with the snow and getting winter. They have probably borrowed over the years as much money as any parish, but they have an amazing record of repaying those loans. I don't know how they do it, because there's not that many of them. But they've been very faithful stewards of the support they've gotten from the diocese. There's still problems out there that need to be addressed, but the issue is that engage the trustees most, and this is probably the most worrisome over the long term. Those are the expensive old buildings.
That's all.
There's a task force looking at that.
There's a task force looking at that. Where the rubber meets the road is, well, how are these little places making it if they're not getting money? There are a few of these for building repairs. To my knowledge, there is a special fund the bishop has authority over, and there are a few places, St. James, Penn Hills, Emmanuel on the north side, I think one or two others, that are receiving money, but it's not out of the regular budget. It's out of a fund that he has the ability to do that. So they're very targeted. The priest Russ mentioned, there are a group of clergy, one of whom is about to get married, that are in their 80s, and they are doing the supply work. Supply means you go in on Sunday and you take a service. I don't know about you, but that's how we're staffing things in their 70s and 80s, are retired priests doing this. I'm sorry, Tom?
Not so many, because there weren't that many retired priests compared to what we have today. And by the way, the answer to your financial question is 11 parishes in this diocese receive financial aid from the diocese.
11. Well, I know one that we did recently, which I completely support. To go from one priest to two full-time is a very hard jump, and there are a couple places where that it's not going to happen without a little help, but you need that extra. Having 250 people, say, at Christ Church North Hills, They really needed the second priest. The diocese helped with that, and then in time they absorbed that second priest's salary, so I believe that funding was pulled away. That's a really smart thing to do, and I believe we did that. Any last, I could talk about all this, but I can't because I got to move on. Tom? Yes, sir.
On the blue page handout, which gives
This one?
that one, on the back side where it talks about the diocese, you look at membership through the years, and then you look at attendance through the years. The first year on that, the attendance was approximately 40% of total membership. The last year, it's 27%. That's the elephant in the room, in my mind. that we
It's true.
1,500 members, but only 350 come to church.
Did you all hear that? So we'd get 40% of membership were attending the church, the diocese, 10, 15 years ago. Now it's closer to a quarter, and Calvary is that way. Our attendance compared to membership at Calvary is very standard for bigger Episcopal churches. The first place I served as rector, I got there, the attendance was about 135, 140. We had 400 members. I did 70 funerals in 7 years. And then when I left, we had 275 on a Sunday and 500 members. So that was an extraordinarily high ratio there. Other places, it's usually a third on members attend on a Sunday. The larger you get, the smaller the percentage is, more like a quarter here. But your point is very well taken. Okay, so remove Calvary from the mix. Where are all these people going that used to come to church? That is the exact question I've been reading about. Fewer people in the Episcopal Church, and it turns out it's the case across the country, across Christianity. Fewer people who used to go that are members, they go less frequently. Meaning if you used to go 3 Sundays a month, now they likely go 2. There are a whole bunch of reasons for that, so they claim. I'm not yet convinced. That's why I continue to read about it. Friends and I have been talking about this for 10 or 15 years of how does that happen. Partly it's a function. I don't see the point. Partly it's a function. We've got kids and they all have sports on Sunday morning, so that removes that whole group. Things like that. But that is a huge, huge problem. It's not just here, it's across the board.
I think that's the problem.
I would say that it is one among many. Others being average age of the members who are still there would be one.
Loss of interest in the Episcopal Church.
We are, that's a good point. Episcopal Church, Methodist Church, Lutheran, Presbyterian are called mainline. Our problem is everybody likes to, you're going to hear it in the sermon. Remember, you are unique just like everybody else. We're unique just like everybody else. And it's all across, even the Roman Catholic Church, adjusting for immigration influx in their population. The same thing's happening there. So, if you have any more questions, write them down. Yes. Ooh. So, all that context, there is in church circles, it's been probably 25 to 30 years, there is a theory, it's been called various things, congregational size theory, church size theory. Anybody heard of this? Arlen Rothage was the originator, and there's a group called the Alban Institute I referenced last week. They're a think tank. They write books, they do consulting, they think about congregational life. They do not just Christian churches, synagogues, all different denominations. They're still in Washington, D.C. I just learned they sold all their stuff, gave it to Duke to manage it. It has ceased to exist as the entity they were. But they did lots of good stuff from the early 70s till just about 5 or 8 years ago. Why? Because they don't have enough churches and money to support them like they used to. So, just by way of reminder, Calvary has 1,600 members, average Sunday attendance of 325, meaning over the course of a year, what is it averaged out, mean average over Sunday? and 345 pledging units. So Joe and Sarah, along with being a lovely couple, are a pledging unit. Leslie is a pledging unit. You can have 8 people in your family. If Todd and Karen represent one pledge, that's one pledging unit. So we have 345 pledging units. Congregations, so this theory goes, it was originally done by Arlen Rothage. It's been adapted. It's one of those things, people who first read this, particularly clergy who've been around, oh, that makes sense of so many things when they encounter this theory. And that is, congregations fall into distinctive size categories. Congregations of different sizes, organized in different ways, each has its own recognizable way of being church. Again, no value, good, bad, whatever on size. It makes sense if you think, if you are a family of 1, or a family of 2, or a family of 5, or a family of 8, you're all a family, one's not better than the other, but how you interact with one another, how you spend your time, your days, your money, etc., is going to be very different depending on size. And so this is a similar idea to that. So average Sunday attendance of all ages averaged over the year is the best predictor of size. Why? Because people make up membership. It's totally fabricated. St. Paul's Mount Lebanon has more communicants than we have. If we culled our rolls, those who have gone to be with the Lord, those who have moved away, those who haven't been here in 25 years, it's probably more like 1,300, Leslie. So you can make up a membership, but your attendance is pretty, for this sake of discussion, pretty accurate. So attendance or pledging units, and notice how close our average Sunday attendance and pledging units is. That's a probably pretty good indicator of our size for the sake of this discussion. Congregations do not grow or decline smoothly, but they tend to plateau. It is amazing to see how that happens, and they often get stuck. And so the original person, Arlen Rothage, as he was describing this, coming up with a theory, it was observing and consulting with hundreds of congregations and saw how congregations get stuck moving up or down. And it's about expectations of how they're organized, how they exist, how they spend money, time, particularly how clergy spends his or her time. And so in order to break through attendance plateau, up or down, the congregation and clergy have to give up, they have to change, that is, how they think it should be structured. So, for example, one good question, it's at the end of all this in your handout. Think to the church that was most foundational, formational for your upbringing, for your expectations about what church is. Your home church. Could be Calvary, could be wherever it was you grew up. How big was that church? Something I experienced, this was in my last place, which was the capital city, still not very big. Almost everybody was from a small town. Our equivalent would be you grew up in the valley all over southwest Pennsylvania, and you come to Pittsburgh to do your back to school clothes shopping, and for Christmas or whatever you do. But if your expectation of church is there's a priest or a pastor and there's 25 people, that shapes how you see it forever. Can you change? Of course you can. But that still is embedded very deep. Who grew up in a really big church, at least as big as Calvary? Anybody? Probably what you see on a Sunday is very normal for you. Who grew up in a really small congregation? How different it is to get used to here. In what ways?
Very different, but the church, because the church building was small, and the church membership was small, church was usually pretty full.
That's correct.
But, yeah, that's my picture.
So what else would you say characteristics of a smaller place? Do you know everybody, and does everybody else know everybody else in this room? I mean, don't disappoint your neighbor, you forgot their name. Probably not. Not when it gets to this scale you can't possibly know everybody. I work really hard. I don't know everybody's name at Calvary Church. But if you grew up in a church of 25 people, you see them, did you pretty much know? You knew everybody. And if so-and-so's cousin is sick, you probably would ask about it. And this person got a new job, or so-and-so's moving away, or hey, we heard the plant might close. All that is in that family. Guess what the smallest church size is called? Family. So, family, pastoral, program, resource are the four main sizes there. Let's see. Let me skip ahead. You can read all this later. Ask questions if you'd like. So here are the four sizes. Up to 50 adults and children at worship is family, primarily because they function like a family unit, usually 2 or 3. I would bet good money if we went to most of the congregations in the Episcopal Diocese of Pittsburgh, that's what you'd see when you went to Denora, which has 12 people, Monongahela with 15. They got a couple more cousins at Monongahela than Denora, or McKeesport or Canonsburg, or you name it. That's the dynamic that's going to exist. They almost never have a full-time priest. It would be extremely rare. And in fact, I think you could make, as the idea of this goes, that congregation is used to organizing itself without a resident priest. And it is very likely the case they have a part-time person who's 80 years old, or on a very rare occasion, they'll get a seminary-trained person right out of seminary with all these awesome ideas, and they will come in there, and they're used to somebody coming for a year or two and leaving, and then a year and then leaving, and then they've got nobody for 6 months, and it pattern repeats itself for 100 years. And if you're that way, and you're in the congregation, you learn to get along quite well without clergy support. They're there to come in and take care of people and do services and leave. You organize the place. It's, again, not good or bad. It's just simply the way it is. And so trying to close one of those churches, they've been abandoned for 100 years. Nobody's fault. It's just the way it is. So they know how to make do with whatever they got. They need a little help when a major structural issue occurs, because that was built probably 50 years ago or 100 when there were a lot more people than there currently are. Pastoral church, and I will add, the vast majority of Episcopal congregations, I don't remember the exact percentage, almost all of them are family size or pastoral size. Calvary size, which is right in the border, if you notice, between those two, that's about 3% of congregations in the country. 200, maybe 250 in the whole country fall right in here where we are above. Almost all of them, thousands, are right here, just like our diocese. We are normal in that sense. So pastoral-sized church, really up to about 150. And this is not obviously an exact figure, but often the case. There is some type of pastor, part-time, half-time, in some cases full-time, and he or she tends to be the central figure. Those families are still there, of course, but they expect some type of trained person who's going to get up and deliver sermons, could do a wedding, a funeral, and might even teach a class or two, and you really expect that preacher to be there when you are sick. What was it like did everybody know, and so you could just drop by? The pastor would drop by.
I think that it was a small church, but it was in the pastoral group because there was a full-time clergy and full-time organist, and
Wow.
you expected that those people would always be there, and they were.
St. Albans is a good example.
Yeah.
It's small, but it's the second
It is
best.
the second, yeah.
It is often the case. I encountered this, my first job as rector. They had been this pastoral size forever and ever and ever. And why don't you keep office hours? It's like, well, I'm here a lot. We want to be able to know you're there, just in case. I said, we got this great invention called the phone. You can call. That's originally why I got a cell phone, is so I could be reached whenever. But the expectation here is not to have clergy because they're not there. Here, it absolutely is, because we're paying them to do this stuff. And you know, we all share, of course. We want them to be there. We want them to be around. This is very normal. This is an extremely painful, difficult place to be if you start to get above that, because all the expectations about all the visiting and membership, and you teach the Bible class, and you're preaching every week, and you do every service, and you think, oh my Lord, 48 Sundays, Holy Week, Christmas, every wedding, every funeral, you're preaching 65 to 70 times a year and doing every service, and you have to run the meetings and plan the confirmation class and, stewardship. And what was it like, Leslie? And you're supposed to be on call and look good and, just you rested so you could just pay attention. That's a very hard place to be. And so what often happens, every time a congregation bumps up to 135, 140, 150, if they don't change their behavior, they drop back down. It happens. I lost 10 pounds and I was really doing great, but then, you know what, I fell off, I stopped exercising. You have to change the behavior consistently over time to get those results. And again, bigger, smaller, we're not talking value, but if you want to change, and so here's where it gets to me most interesting. Calvary Church, going back a page, 345 pledging units, 325 attendance. Anybody venture to guess how long we've had this attendance? Between 325 and 350. I know for sure at least how far back it goes. I can't prove farther back yet. So the parish profile, the narrative document when a new priest is coming, for me, for Harold, for Arthur, the attendance is within about, and thanks to Bob Diltz and Becky for giving this to me, is between about 25 people difference. 325 to 350 before Arthur came. Is that 85? So 84. Before that, John Bays. It's a really different era. Remember, our heyday was 1968. We started, not just Calvary necessarily, but the Episcopal Church started doing that. So we've been about that same attendance, give or take, for a long time. And look where it sits. We're right between these two places. So Program Church, known for the churches of this size are known for the quality and variety of their programs. That's the place you go for sacred music. That's where you go for youth group. That's where you go for stewardship or whatever it may be.
It doesn't say known for range and diversity. Oh, it does say diversity of the congregation. I wanted to be sure that
It depends. Some really small places are actually diverse in terms of ethnically. Some are not. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be all white people or all black people or all mixed. It really depends on the particular congregation. Often it's historic ties, and largely depends on where it is. But here, you are going to, most of the time, some type of program for various groups. You get big enough where we want a seniors group who takes trips. We want a youth group. We want children's ministry. We want whatever. Multiple choirs, for example. That's the norm. There's almost always a full-time clergy person there. You usually get two at a bigger one. The minister's role, noticed, the role of the priest changes in each of these. The role of the governing board, the vestry, changes in each of these, and how they function. And so one of the most painful things in the world is when we used to be at St. Swithin's, 250 on Sunday, and I remember when there's a waiting list for the rector's dinners, and don't you remember when the kids were full and we had to drop off the youth group, and there was this Wednesday afternoon thing, and it was so full, And now if your church has 50 on a Sunday, you still think like it used to be, and that's really challenging place to be. I personally think, from a year of observation, we are struggling with what is most natural for us. Not good, not bad. We like this, and we like some of that, and so we just stay right there. That might be perfectly fine. Let's look at resource. Sometimes resource is known as corporate-sized church. Resource is probably a better term. When they wrote corporate, they didn't mean what we think of as corporate. The category of this church is known for excellence in worship and music. I would say that's us. A big, pretty building. Range and diversity of its programs. Think of all the meetings that occur here. There's people who use the space, the outreach, the music, the worship, and so on and so forth. The senior pastor, the rector, spends more time preparing to preach and lead worship than most clergy. Probably, maybe. But that's a big role. Could we get away with bad preaching at Calvary Church? I don't mean your occasional stinker, but, over time, there has to be a certain level here. There has to be a certain level of music. And I will embarrass her, but Wheezy Wells has the best expression for this. And she says it with a certain look on her face, the Calvary way. When we serve coffee after the 11, do we serve it in Dixie cups? No. We have people serve you in silver, and that's a great... Do we do that at 8? No. But there's a way that we do things. It's always been done extremely well. We would not be happy if there were less. There's a certain expectation. And that way, we are absolutely in that resource. How the diocese thinks of us is certainly that way.
Is that what's called cardinal parish?
Yes. In the old days, that term kind of disappeared because a lot of the cardinal parishes disappeared. There are about half of Calvary's left than there were 25 years ago for a variety of reasons. But these would be the cardinal parishes. I've said this many times. I knew about Calvary Church when I was in college because it was a cardinal parish. It was here you knew what we did, what we stood for. There were others, but in this big section of the country, Trinity, Cleveland, then you went to Calvary, then you went to Philadelphia, depending on what you're talking about, Christ Church, Philadelphia, or St. Mark's, that was a worship thing. The big cities each had one or two. Now most of the big cities have one, if that. So let's see how the senior pastor organizes his or her time, working with a diverse staff full of full-time professionals. So how many full-time staff members you got up here? 0. Here, you might get a full-time priest. Maybe you'll have a part-time secretary, maybe very part-time bookkeeper, maybe somebody's a sexton. When I was in that church I mentioned before that grew, we never had a sexton. We had 8 cleaning service once a week, and parishioners volunteered to clean it. That was not sustainable because there were so many people using the building, but they didn't want to spend the money. So parishioners shoveled snow. I salted on Sunday. I had to get there extra early. I tell you, they got really old. You get to here, we kind of expect you have a full-time priest, maybe 2. There's got to be some type of secretary. Do you expect a church bulletin or newsletter here? No. It's got to be really good by the time you get to here. So the expectations change. Clergy continue to provide pastoral care. Not to say how super busy I am, but if you're in small church, there are fewer things going on. You could expect the priest, according to the theory, just stop by that day. People want to meet with me about church. It's usually, if somebody's dying, I drop everything and go. But it's just 2 weeks of stuff always stacked up for all of us. And it's not because we're out of the ordinary. Those are the expectations here. It's different. It's a different type of relationship. Most members find their spiritual support in small groups or from lay visitors. What does that mean? The choir is a support group. The choir looks after each other. Other people do too. So does Christian Ed. So does your EFM, Education for Ministry group. That's how those relationships function, not through the family, not through the pastor. How does Calvary, one of my questions for us to ponder longer term, how do we express ourselves or organize ourselves this way? How do we fit here? Vestry has a significant role. I don't want to give too specific examples to embarrass somebody. Sometimes things happen here and I have no idea until I see it on the calendar. And it's all appropriate. And then other times, before something happens, I'll get a letter or a phone call or an email, would it be okay with you if we did this? And it's not a crazy thing. It's what you'd normally expect to have happen here. And part of that, I think, again, it's not bad or good, it's the expectation of what the role of the rector is. Do I need to approve everything? And some people, oh God, yes. Or we'll get in trouble, or it's just not right. And other times, it never occurred to me to ask. It depends on one's perspective. And partly, in here, I don't have time to do that. Worship, yes. Other things, yes. But in here, there tends to be a little bit more time. What thoughts or questions about this? Anything strike you? Gordon.
One of the things that strikes me is that I think that we are clearly a resource church and not a program church.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is I think that the weekly attendance, the average weekly attendance is misleading for Calvary. We're a very mobile congregation.
Mm-hmm.
We have lots of professors and researchers, a lot of people with second homes, even third homes, who are not here. I go to church 52 weeks a year.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll bet
That is true.
Very small, much smaller percentage of those at Calvary because I'm away a lot. I think that's typical of people at Calvary. I think a lot of people have much more ease of, for example, going to a wedding or a party that's out of town and are not at church at Calvary, but who are very committed and involved members of Calvary. And I think that the statistic to just say that we have 345 people who are so deeply involved that they come to church on a regular basis is somewhat misleading. I think there's a much larger number.
Well, the point of this, it's 345 are pledging units, 325 is Sunday attendance. It's the best, the attendance anyways, the best single indicator. The pledging unit's another good one.
But what I'm saying is that you can find a lot of people who will attend 80% of the time, 10 months of the year, but are away for the entire summer.
Which
Those are people who are deeply involved.
is not that uncommon in the Episcopal Church. I take your point, and I agree with you, but he's accounting for that. I will say Calvary, I believe, is you have to add in more than attendance or pledging units because of our historic nature of how we engage the city and how we engage the diocese. And we don't have, you could not count as membership. Where's Roger was asking me last week, do we count this concert as attendance? Well, no. If there's a priest vested who's saying prayers, then it's a worship service. But if it's a concert, it may draw hundreds of people, but it's not a worship service. Every week, he's not here. I was asking Tim, I did not realize this. We have the oldest AA group in Pittsburgh. There's 75 people in here and 75 people in there every week. Last week, I had somebody come to me very upset because they got bumped, their ministry group, and they were very mad. And I said, I'm so sorry, but isn't it wonderful that there are so many meetings, every single room is taken. The parlor, the parish hall, the refectory, the conference room, all were full. And so in that sense, we operate like a much bigger place than we are in just attendance or pledging. That's absolutely true. But how we organize ourselves, how we think of ourselves, I think often the case goes to program. For example, this is where we, you're neither fish nor fowl. That was the point in that title. How many committees, and I mean actually functioning committees, exist at Calvary Church? There's a finance, there's an audit, there is stewardship. Is there a buildings and grounds committee?
Yes, but not very active. Personnel.
Personnel started, yep. Reporting to the vestry, a committee of the, I don't mean a name with the committee, I mean is a committee of the vestry, does work for the vestry, reports to them so the vestry can focus on a variety of things. In most churches our size, we'd have 2 to 3 times the number we have. They would be much more active reporting to vestry, not good, not bad. We tend to act like this in that form of organizational structure. It makes it a lot more complicated sometimes to do things. Joe.
Sound like a broken record, I'm sorry, but it seems to me that the moral is that you don't move from one to the other unless you have the infrastructure to move. You can't go from founding to pastoral unless you have a full-time pastor.
You don't move unless it's a conscious decision to move, and then consciously people change their behavior. And maybe it's you don't want to move.
Fall back down. If you started up but you're not prepared for it, you're going to go back to where you were.
Yeah.
And you said it's not bad or good.
I think where it's most comfortable for us is exactly where we've been. Because we had a really different focus, at least for a long time. I don't mean to, how do I say this? A beloved pastor died in office. It was devastating. That's a shock to the system. It takes a long time to get over that. And then as we start to as a congregation, then we say, oh my Lord, is the diocese thinking about leaving? And what's this bishop up to? And we're the ones, rightly so, called to lead, to stay Episcopal. And so that's been our focus for 20 years, 18 years. We can't mess with any of this stuff. We're where it's comfortable. I think now, to a large degree, everybody loves Arthur McNulty, but we've mostly grieved. Not all the way, but mostly. And with the diocese, I think those who needed to grieve, some are like, thank God, but it's at least the fighting part is over. I noticed that other priests now talk to me. They didn't before. They treat me warmly. Calvary's thought of differently than it was just a couple years ago. That's a work from all of you and frankly, just time. And so it never could be a conscious decision because we're doing the right thing at the time. That was okay. So over time, please read this, and we'll talk about it a little bit next week. One is not better or worse, but it's simply how you organize yourself. Thank you.